Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another Adobe Live. We have got a very good couple of days planned for you all as we are entering a masterclass with the one and only Ron. Welcome, Ron. Good to have you back.
Thanks, Maddie. Good to be back.
Oh, it's so good. And it's also good that it's British summertime. The weather's been lovely and hot. We've had a lot of thunderstorms, of course, but it's so good to be here doing a photography masterclass today and tomorrow, as well as our other schedule of live events that we have every day. And we're live every day from midday until 1 p.m, everybody. And if you want to chat with Ron today, ask Ron any questions. Ron is a professional photographer from London. So we're going to be really getting into how Ron begins his process, looking at some amazing images. I've already seen some of Ron's work and it's really good. Making me miss London, Ron, already. Really good stuff. And we've got so many people back in the chat and it's so lovely to see everybody back. I can see here we already have, here we go, hey Caroline, Kirsty, Stuart, Sean and Sandrine. And do you know what, Ron, everyone's saying here already that they're so glad that you're back. Sandrine says, oh, Ron, superb. And Caroline is so glad that you're back. She says she's looking forward to this. Really good to see you all. And of course, we've got people from all over the world dialing in. I know that Steve's dialing in from New Zealand already as well. And there's a lot of chat in a lot of chat around Speedos and swimwear in the chat at the moment. I think that's because maybe the hot weather's getting everybody excited to get out there. But we'll stick to photography today for sure. What have you got in store for us then, Ron, over the next couple of days?
Okay, so today, obviously it's World Photography Day today, and I thought why not dive into how to use the tone curve. It's one of Lightroom's most powerful tools. It's also one of people's most feared tools to use because it looks quite intimidating at first, quite scary, not really sure where to start. So I'm going to go back to basics with the tone curve, explain what it does, how it works, and then as we progress through the tutorial today, we're going to get into real detail into how you can use it to make very specific corrections to contrast and tonality of your image. So yeah, it's going to be an intense one, but also a really fun one. And hopefully you'll come away feeling really, really confident by the end of this one. And tomorrow we're going to be diving into the color tab and manipulating color. So the HSL tab, using the sliders within that tool, and also looking at split toning, and effectively just color grading your image so you can add your complete visual signature, as I like to say. So I think with the tone curve and the HSL tab together, I think those are the most two definitive things that you can add your flavor to images. So
fab. Yeah. It sounds good. And it's great timing, right? Because it is World Photography Day today. So, fab timing. And your work, I've seen, from everything that you've shared so far, Ron, and you've been with Adobe, working with us for about the last 4 years or so.
Yeah.
Something like that.
Amazing.
So, yeah, and I'm sure it flies, right? Time flies. And you do so much, right? There's so many different parts to your work. You've got landscapes, you've got portraits. I'm really looking forward to seeing your work today.
Thank you. Excited to share it.
Yeah, so let's go. Let's jump in to some images. And as I said, I'm totally going to be missing London right now over here in Wales. Let's have a little look. There you go.
All right. So we will start with signature foggy London image. Those of you following my work know I love foggy images. Don't know what it is about it. It's atmospheric and yeah. Anyway, but the basis of the edit that I've done so far, I've not really played around with too much. I've only played around with the highlights and the shadows, just so you can really see the full power of the tone curve and what it does. I guess we'll start by explaining what the tone curve is. If you head down to the tone curve panel on the right-hand side of Lightroom, you'll see this box with a line through it and a histogram in the back. This is the tone curve, and there are multiple different ways it can be used. The most common way is to add very specific contrast to certain areas of your image. When I say areas, I mean tones or tonality sections of your image. So to make that more simple, when I refer to tones or tonality, if you scroll up, you actually have a panel here that says tone. And the tone curve is just another way of editing all the different sections in this panel. So you've got the highlights, well, the exposure, the contrast, highlights, shadows, whites, and blacks. And these are all represented within the tone curve here. And the way that works is this line, if you move it up, you are effectively adjusting the exposure. So when you move it up, you're bringing in more light into your tones. When you bring it down, you're reducing the light that's added. What makes this so powerful is that you can change the brightness of the shadows, like for example here, but you can also do that without affecting too much of the highlights. So whereas you might think, okay, look, I can add contrast using the global contrast slider up here, what this does is it affects everything in the image. So it will brighten the brightest parts, but also darken the darkest parts. And you might not want to do that all the time. You might want to maybe just darken this section here or the darkest parts of your image. And so this is why it's really, really powerful. The easiest way to use the tone curve, and I guess the most common way to use it, is to add use 5 points on your tone curve. So you would add 3. What I mean by this is you would add a middle point by clicking. You would add a point up here as well, so in top 4/5, and then you would add one down here. And what that gives you is a 5-point tone curve. And with 5 points, it gives you enough control to edit your image effectively. So start with 5. 5 is always a good base to go off of. Now, I'm just going to run through and just show you a bit clearer what each part affects. So if you look at here, you see the darkest parts of my images. These are what's considered the blacks. So as you can see, when I move the black slider, it's affecting the darkest parts. However, if you want to be a lot more precise and have a lot more control without affecting the rest of the image, you can also do that by using this bottom left point on your tone curve. And if you bring it up, you can see it introduces some light to it. If you move it the other way, it's going to darken it. So that's pretty much the basis, but for each point, it's going to affect a different part of the image. If you're unsure about what part of the image you want to adjust the exposure for, or the tonality for, there's a really easy way to check. And if you look just next to the adjust button, there's a little sort of widget thing here. I don't know what to describe it, but if you give that a click, you can then hover over your image at the point you want to adjust. And on the right-hand side here on the tone curve, you will then see the point moving in correspondence to that. So if I move it down, you can see it's showing you what part of the tone curve is corresponding to that tonality, basically. So yeah, that's an easy way for you to try and get your head around what does what visually on the tone curve. We're going to go into the most basic type of contrast curve that is used in the tone curve, and there's something called the S curve. Really simply, the S curve is you draw an S using these points, and what that does is it adds contrast to your image. The reason being, for example, if I drag down the shadows, I'm making the shadows darker, but now if I move up the highlights or the bright parts, you can see it's now added contrast, and the shape of this curve is an S. That's really, really simple. That's the easiest one to use. And again, it's a lot more controlled and specific than just using the contrast slider. So just an example, if I turn off the tone curve, this is it flat out of camera. If you use the tone curve, you've now added a bit more contrast and a bit more depth. And so, as you can see, you can use it in multiple different ways. I know a lot of people love using presets or film presets, and this is basically how they do it. So this is where a lot of the work happens within those presets. And I'm going to run you through my favorite type of S-curve. So I've developed my own sort of style by using S-curves, and this is what I use predominantly for the majority of my images. And that is how you get a consistent look overall. So even if you're editing cityscapes or landscapes or portraits, if you have a similar tone curve, then the stylistic look of your images will look the same. So the way I do it, this is the style I like to do, and it's actually a very common film S-curve is what they call it, because it has the attributes of an image taken on a film camera. And so what I do is I bring this lower point here to round about here. I then move the center point to the left slightly, so it brightens up the image as a whole. I then move this one down just a little bit, so it's not, the highest points aren't too bright. You can see if I move it up and down, I'm now losing a bit of detail in the highlights. So I like to keep this down just a little bit. And that is essentially my favorite tone curve, or the tone curve that I like to use.
And then how do you save that? Like, how do you then apply that to every image that you have thereafter to get that look and feel?
Yeah, I mean, it's really simple. So once you're happy with the tone curve that you've made, you can create a preset, which is again what presets do. So if you buy presets, that's what they've done. But you can head down to copy at the bottom, and you can choose what parts of your changes you want to save. So for this one, because I've only adjusted really the tone curve, I'm just going to have the tone curve selected. I can then copy that, and then if I want to go to another image, I can simply just paste that tone curve, and it will copy exactly the same stylistically. So that's how you copy and paste. If you wanted to save it for future use, then I would recommend heading up to presets tab on the left. There's a plus icon here. If you give that a click, you can then press create preset, and again you will have the same options for you to choose what you want to save from that preset. You can give it a name, Ron's preset, etc., etc., and then you can go ahead and use that whenever you want, and it will appear in the presets tab on the left. So hopefully that makes sense. Are there any questions so far? Because it's going to go a bit more in a minute.
Sure. I mean, there's no question so much about the preset, but I know that Sandrine mentioned that doing in the curve that you have done, it means that you always expose the shadows, and she can see that you're not darkening them in your curve.
Yeah. So I tend not to darken them too much in this tone curve. I'm going to explain why, because what I find with Lightroom is a balance of using all of the different panels, and I like to add richness and darkness using other panels. So it really is a balancing act, and you find your style and it develops over time. But I'm going to really go into detail how I use the tone curve to create an even more contrasty or faded whatever look that I want. I'm actually going to reset this tone curve now. Just to bear in mind, I've been editing this tone curve using the RGB channel, which is the red, blue, and green tone curves all meshed into one. So you get a kind of, it's not a colorized tone curve, it's just tonality. But what I like to do is I like to go into the individual channels. So the red channel individually, the green channel, and the blue channel, and tweak those to get a specific look that I want. I'll then go back to the RGB channel as a whole, and I can do minute changes to just the contrast and tonality. So hopefully that makes sense. I highly recommend just having fun with it and experimenting. There's no wrong or right way of doing it. You just got to spend time playing around, and it looks messy sometimes, it looks great sometimes, but you'll get the gist of it. It's just practice, honestly.
Yeah. And then, you know, like the wedding photographers that, you know, that kind of lovely kind of light haze that they kind of apply to all of their images. If you were trying to get that kind of that effect on your photos, would it just be as simple then as just going, I mean, you could obviously add a tone curve there to make sure that all of the light is, I guess, the light is captured, and you take away maybe a lot of the shadows. I mean, how would you go about making it a lot lighter and really brightening up an image? So
a lot with an image like that. Most of it again is done in the tone curve. What I've seen is that the exposure tends to go up. So as you've seen, the middle point here affects all of the the median tones in the image. So that would normally go up, and as you can see, it's brighten the shadows and the darker parts. Often I see wedding photographers apply a sort of film style as well as an airy light fill. And what they do is they tend to crush the highlights or reduce the whites. And that can be done by the top right point here. So if you move it down, you can see it sort of fades the brightest parts of your image. So even though the midtones of the image are brighter, the overall tonality is still retained. And again, if you wanted to add an S-curve, you could do that and maybe darken the shadows a little bit, but that's the general gist. It's moving up the midpoints and then bringing down the highlights to get that kind of faded look.
Fab. You're really encouraging people in the chat to explore this process more. I know Stuart says that he should really play with the RGB more.
Definitely. I mean, I can show you the way I use it. It looks very strange until you get to the final color. So just bear that in mind, because you might think you're doing it wrong, but you're really not. You'll see. So as I explained before, the tone curve that I like to use was the sort of film S-curve. And so what I do is I apply that same curve into the individual channels. And then overall, that will give me my contrast. So I'm going to add the 3 points again to make the 5 total. And we're just going to be really, really simple with this. I'm just going to bring this down like before. I'm going to move this to the side a little bit. And then I'm going to move this up very slightly. As you can see, that looks horrific. Like it doesn't look normal at all, but just bear with me and it will start to make sense. I should explain what I've done here is in the red channel, when I move the tone curve up, I'm introducing more red into my image. When I'm bringing it down, I'm introducing the opposite of red, which is cyan. So just bear that in mind. That's what the color channels do. Similarly with the green, if I move it up, I'm introducing more green into my image, as you can see. If I bring it down, I'm introducing more magenta, which is the opposite of green. And then similarly for blue, if I introduce blue by moving it up, it adds blue. If I pull it down, it introduces yellow, or the opposite of blue. So think cold and warm. It's just opposites.
Yeah, and it's good that it helps you out actually there, like in the actual tone curve box, you can see the red and the blue, so you know, what we'll get to. Caroline says in the chat, I was so disappointed with my wedding photos. I wanted to alter them all. I'm with you, Caroline. Honestly, I totally. This is why I'm asking these these questions. But yeah, and Jackie asks you a question, Ronnie. She says that so you could make your pics look really cold with just the red channel.
Ideally, yeah, or the blue channel, yeah. So this is a great way to really stylize your images or add unique color grading to your images. They take a lot of work to get to the point you want, but when you do, it's a very unique and it's a fulfilling process actually. So I would highly recommend it for sure.
Good to see.
Cool. So I'm going to keep going. So I'm going to move to the green channel now. And again, I'm just going to apply the same tone curve. So I'm just going to move this down a little bit. Bring this to the left. I'm going to add a point here. Just bring that down slightly. And then hopefully, by the time I add the blue channel now, it should look back to normal in terms of color anyway. So I'm going to add, again, another 3 points. Bring this one down. And then I'm going to move this to the right a little bit and move this up ever so slightly. And now what you want to do is just go back and just balance them out a little bit. So, I mean, they look fairly similar. And overall, you'll have now something that has added contrast to the image. So if you look before and after, you can see it's now added contrast, but in a slightly different way. And you can be very creative. If you wanted more blue in the shadows, you could then pull up the blue point here and just introduce some more blue. As you can see, these shadows here have now become a bit more blue. So if you wanted to make them colder, you could do that, or more warmer, etc., etc. So the world is really your oyster. Once you get to know how these tone curves work individually, you can do whatever you like, which is awesome.
Nice.
Right.
And what's your favorite thing to photograph on? Like, is it photos like this? You said that you like the fog and the mist in an image.
I love, moody atmospheric photos. I think whether that's portraiture or landscape or cityscape, I think when it has atmosphere, it draws me into it a bit more. Although I love beautiful sunsets and sunrises and very bright images, I just feel like the kind of moody atmospheric stuff resonates with me more. And I think it's due to my taste in music as well. I love like jazz and blues and sad music and all sorts. So I think that's probably why. Cool. All right. So we've got the basic color adjustments now done in the tone curve. Now, the way I would use the RGB channel, as I said before, is just to make very minor changes to the tonality. What I love doing is adding fade to my images. Not a lot, but just a little bit to give it that sort of extra film look. And so to do that, I'm going to add one point here. I'm going to add another point here. And I'm just going to move the darkest parts of the image up ever so slightly. So I'm affecting only the darkest parts here. And if I move it up, you can see it's adding fade. If I move it down, it's going back to true black. And so what I'll do is I'll move it up ever so slightly just to give it a sort of softer, hazy feel. And yeah, this is the basis of what my tone curve is. For those of you who struggle with doing all of that or don't have the time, then there is another section on the tone curve, which is this symbol here. And you can actually change the tone curve by moving sliders. So similar to moving the sliders up here, you can do the same on the tone curve. And so if I move the lights, you can see the tone curve up here is moving. So it's just another way of visualizing it or playing around. What I like to do, I actually like to do all of these and then also add some changes with the sliders as well. And that way you have a really strong, powerful, precise tone curve that you can adjust in any way you want. So if you can master all five of those different channels, then on to your winner.
It's good to see another approach, to that. And there is a question actually from Sandrine who says, since you like fog, do you pay extra special attention to having the softest tones, extended range in the smoke? I do, yeah. As in when I tend to shoot, is that the question? So do I pay attention to the highlights mainly, or? I'm not sure, Sandrine, if you give us a little more info. But I think just
I guess I can talk about. So when I photograph in general, I normally underexpose my image very, very slightly. Not a lot, maybe by a third of a stop or so. That way I know that the brightest part of my images are retained, because once they're gone, if you overexpose highlights, you can't get them back. Shadows are more forgiving than highlights. So if I underexpose and something is completely black, I might be able to bring back the shadows in that. But if something is completely white, it's gone. So yeah, that's how I shoot anyway.
Cool. Thank you.
No worries.
Nice.
Yeah.
And you've got some great work when we look at tones, and I know that there's a lot of other some more images that you've got to share with us. But I don't want to jump away from this though, because of course this is a 2-day masterclass, and I know we've got more to share as well. But there's some other great images where you've played around with this curve to see the tones. So more to come for that.
So I'm going to copy and paste this curve now, and we'll apply it to another image. So similar to before, so you head down to copy at the bottom left, And I'm just going to copy the tone curve and click copy on that. So now we've got the basis. We can go to, again, let's try this one. We'll do an image of Chicago, one of my favorite cities. And so if I click paste, it's going to paste that same tone curve from before. And as you can see, it's added a sort of matte look or matte feel, which is the style that I love to use. I'm just going to show you before and after really quickly, just so you can see it again. So this is flat out of camera, and then this is with my tone curve applied. And I just think it gives a nice, soft, smooth feel to what can sometimes be very harsh cityscape shots. I like to keep the tonality looking very, very clean and smooth. And so that's what I do. You can then go and tweak the tone panel, so the sliders with the highlights and shadows. It's just a balance in that. So once you've got your base tone curve, you can then go and play around with the color and the tonality adjustments. So that's what I tend to do. And then also that gives you a very streamlined process when it comes to editing. So if you are photographing a wedding or you're shooting an editorial piece that needs to be out within the hour, once you have your consistent workflow or your preset that you've designed, you can just paste it and apply it and then make minor adjustments. And honestly, that's saved me so much time. So it really is worth investing that time. And the fun thing is, over time, your stylistic preferences will change, and you will end up changing your tone curve or changing the colors you use in your image. And it's nice to be able to then have a catalog of different presets, which you can then use for any scenario that you want.
Yeah, I think if you look at like where we are now, and a lot of people have been in lockdown, I think one of the main acts that our photographers are using at the moment is to go back and revisit all the images and adapt them to the new presets that they're working with now over the years, right?
100%, yeah. I mean, I love going back and re-editing photos. One, for memories, but two, just to apply the new knowledge that I've learned and the new stylistic changes. It's great fun. I highly recommend doing it. I look back at some of my edits from like 2016 and I'm like, oh my gosh, what was I doing? This is so bad. But I mean, that's good. It's all learning. And yeah, it's progression. And it's actually nice to see how far you've come from when you've last edited an image to present day. So definitely do that. You can also add the global adjustment of contrast after as well. Not all images are the same in terms of tonality. Some images, if they're shot in harsh light, can be way more contrasty than those shot at sunset. And so the contrast that you've added using your tone curve might be too much for a harsh lit day. So you can then go into the global adjustment slider for contrast and just tweak that. But again, most of the work has been done in the tone curve, so it saves a lot of time.
Yeah, there is a question from Stuart who says,
Yep.
do you ever use the histogram of showing where the deep blacks and whites have blown out, as that's quite useful?
It is very useful, yeah. So the histogram at the top on the right-hand side, again, this shows the tonality of the image. I can go into a bit of detail. So as you can see, this image is quite dark in terms of tonality, as in this nighttime shot. So most of my colors and my tone are actually on the bottom left-hand side of the histogram, which represents the blacks. I mean, you can see, if you see just underneath it, it actually labels what you're hovering over. So this point here is the blacks. This are the shadows. You then have the exposure or the general midtones. You've got the highlights and then the whites. Most things in tonality follow that suit, pretty much. But if you're scared about part of your image being too dark or part of your image being too bright, so like clipped, as people like to say, then there are these little arrows on the top that you can click and they will show you what is in and what's out, basically. So I've clicked the highlights triangle now, and everything that's overexposed is highlighted in red. So I'm just going to click that again so you can see. So it's very, very useful to actually have these on. I tend to keep them off and then just check back and forth. but it will show you what is in and what's out. And it's really important because if you then go to print your image or you go to display it somewhere, those colors might not render, and it will look very, very weird. It has a very strange texture to the lighting or the colors. They just don't show up very well at all. So you want to make sure that you're not seeing any of these red highlights in your images. You can use the tone curve very easily to correct them, which is very good you brought up actually. But as I spoke about the wedding photography earlier and the style and about them bringing down the highlights, if you do that on any image like this that's overexposed, if I move the top right corner down, you can see it disappears instantly because you're flattening the brightest points. But as you can see, if I move it to the left, they're so bright. They're so bright that it's now clipping. So it's a very easy way to correct the tonality of your brightest points.
So good to see. And everybody, we're about halfway through now. So if you have any questions for Ron, get them into Behance. We are chatting on behance.net/live.
Cool. So yeah, I mean, that's basically it for cityscapes. I'm going to show you how you can now apply it to, say, for example, portrait. This is one of my friends, Aaron, who I photographed for a documentary we're creating. But again, we're just going to apply that tone curve that we've used on our cityscape shots. And you can see it adds a very nice kind of glow to the image. I'm just going to go back and forth again so you can see. There we go. So that's before, flat, out of camera, and this is after. So it just gives a different mood, it gives a different feel to the image, and that's what you really want to be doing with a tone curve. It can be used in so many different ways. It's actually amazing. It's so fun.
Do you find that you've got like a different preset for your landscapes, different preset for like the foggy cityscapes, and then portraits?
Yeah, I do. Yeah, for sure. With portraits, I tend to not have them as contrasty. I find that I have to add a bit more contrast when it comes to images like this to make them pop more. But when it comes to portraits, if you have too much contrast, it can make the skin look very strange. For example, I'll show you just on here. If I made the tone curve too strong, it looks quite amateurish. In my opinion, it's too heavy-handed. So when it comes to skin and portraits, I'll normally keep it a lot more subtle. So I have slight variations on my tone curves. So I have ones that are like this, and I've got ones that are slightly more slightly less contrasty when it comes to the colors.
Sure. And Kirsty wants to know how you manage your images.
Okay. As in the process, I'm guessing. So I like to, once I've done a shoot or I've taken photos, I'll import them to my iMac. I'll then immediately save them onto another hard drive. It's very, very important that you back up all of your stuff twice if you can, if not once, because I've been unfortunate where I've lost like thousands of images from not backing up correctly. No. So that's one thing I always do. Make sure you back up properly. I'll then label the folders so that I know what the content of those folders are. I'll then import that folder into Lightroom, and Lightroom does very, very well into categorizing your images. So I mean, I can give you a little lowdown. So yeah, I'll do it by year as well. So 2019, 2020. And you can just kind of see the different dates, and then inside we'll have what the content of that is. So yeah, I recommend using that. But even if you don't want to label your folders, then Lightroom has a very good import system anyway. Once you import it from the import dialog, I mean from here, it goes into a folder which is automatically dated and timed. So yeah, Lightroom can do that for you if you want to.
It's good, isn't it? It's good to be, definitely good to be organized. I think That's one of the things I've learned from Adobe Live, from seeing everybody's process. It's always organization. It start at the beginning, make sure you back it up. And
also, because it's a nightmare if you get down the road and you have to start finding images, you don't know where they are. And it's a problem. Like, I've taken nearly 200,000 images now, and just finding individual ones, it can be a nightmare if it's not properly sorted. But yeah, cool.
Yeah, no, definitely. Cool. And
yeah,
for your portraits, I mean, who would you love to photograph?
Do you know what? Keanu Reeves.
He is. He's a guest speaker at Max this year for us. Adobe Max. He is. He'd be great. He'd be great, actually. Yeah. Good. I totally did not think you'd say that. No. Cool.
I love him. Yeah, he's awesome. I'm a big fan of The Matrix as well. So like, he'd be epic.
Yeah.
He seems like a gentleman as well. So yeah.
He does. Oh, cool.
Maybe that's a question for everyone else watching. Who would you like to photograph?
Yeah, let us know. Because we're back tomorrow for the second part of the masterclass. So yeah, we can.
That's true.
Yeah, let us know in the chat, everyone. Oh, Tim's saying, can't wait to see Keanu at Max.
Nice.
Yeah. So cool.
Yeah. I mean, this is just pretty much, once you've got your tone curve sorted, you can use it for anything. It's really, really powerful. Tomorrow's session, I'm going to go into more about the hue, saturation, luminance tab, because when you combine these two elements together, that's when you really get your style. There are ways of creating your preset based, or your color preset, just off of the red, green and blue channels. But I find that it takes a bit too much time to get to that end result when you can use it very effectively just using the hue, saturation, color tab. But yeah, again, like another question for everyone watching, it'll be interesting to know how you guys use the tone curve as well. But yeah, I like having a little bit of fade in the blacks. I tend not to fade the highlights. Let me see if I can find another example where I can show you what fading the highlights looks like. If you look to the left of this image here, if you fade the highlights too much, it can look a bit fake. In my opinion, I know people love to crush the highlights quite a lot, but I don't. I think less is more often. So with editing, it's good to look at it as if you're seasoning some food. You don't want to have too much salt or too much pepper. Editing is like that. Just be very careful. Don't be too heavy-handed. I think another thing to watch out when using the tone curve is you don't want any points of inflections. What I mean by that is if you have, let me show you on another image. I'll show you on this one. So I'm going to paste the tone curve.
I love that image.
Oh yeah, it was sunrise image in Chicago. Beautiful. Yeah, so what I mean by inflections, you don't want the point to the right being lower than the point to the left, basically. What that does is it creates very strange artifacts within your image. So say I did this and I've now moved this point up higher than the point on the right. You can see the blacks have gone very strange. It creates a very weird texture to the image. So a rule of thumb is you never want the point to the left to be higher than the point to the right. So I'm just going to show you again, like it's a bit too much. And then what happens is the colors then clip, which means when it's printed, it looks really awful. And yeah, just don't do that, basically.
Yeah, it looks like oil.
It does, doesn't it? Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I can show you really quickly. Again, if I do it here, it just loses all detail. It just completely ruins the image. So yeah, you don't want to do that. Keep it simple, and use an S curve.
And if you're going to speak to some new photographers and they're starting out for the first time with this tone curve, setting up a preset, how much time would you say that should take? I mean, I know it can be any length of time, but how long would it take you to set that up, get your preset?
I think the first time I created my own preset just using the tone curve, It took me around 30 minutes. But I spent a lot of time making really minor tweaks, looking at what individual minute movements did to my image. I mean, yeah, I think around 30 minutes is a good amount of time to make a preset if you've never made one before. If you do make a preset that has adjustments to every aspect of the editing suite, then that can take up to an hour. I think what it really is don't limit yourself on time. Take as long as you need, and you can develop that preset over a day or two, and then come back to it in a month and reassess it and say, look, do I want to tweak something? It's really an ongoing process, but I think the initial time investment, just really sit there and just dive in, and it will make everything so much more clear.
Yeah, you said earlier, you know, that once you're set up with your preset and you can apply this to your images and just make little tweaks to deliver something quite quickly after a shoot. So, yeah, fair enough.
Exactly. I mean, I guess I'll show another example of how to use it. So, I mean, again, the benefit of creating the contrast or the tone curves using individual channels is it gives you so much more freedom with the RGB channel. So if you wanted to then have the same contrast over your image, but then you wanted that wedding, the bright wedding photography look, then you can apply that very simply. But then you can still have that same core principle of tone curves. And then if you wanted a dark cityscape moody image, you can just tweak this one. So yeah.
Yeah. And there's a couple of people in the chat, actually. I know I can see one here from Oliver. He says, if you drag the left point to the top and the right point to the bottom, it inverts the image. And Oliver's done that deliberately with scanned negatives.
That's true as well. Yeah. I mean, we can have a look at that, but cool. So that's, yeah. And then you you scan that for negatives.
Wow.
I mean, that's what film effectively is when you scan film. So yeah. That's a new one. I've never done that myself, though. That's pretty cool.
Really different.
Yeah.
Different kind of look, for sure.
Awesome. That's good stuff. I guess, is there any more questions? I mean, that's the basis. Is there anything anyone would like to know specifically about tone curves? Let me know if there's anything that you've been troubled with, and I'll be happy to help.
Sure. I think, you know, if we go back, I know that you've been doing a lot of live sessions for us at Adobe now. What was the best thing that you learned? I mean, I know that you've shared, you know, the tone curve today, which is a really good tip. But, you know, as you were learning photography and as you were learning this editing process, what's been the best thing that you've taken away?
Practice. I mean, that's the biggest thing. I spent countless hours in Lightroom, countless. And the more you spend on this software, the better, and the more you're going to keep learning. So really, really invest time in your editing. I remember I didn't like editing at first. I just wanted to be out there taking photos. But then I really found the love and the passion for editing, and applying my kind of visual signatures to my images. So one's practice. Two is research. I think look at other people's work and take inspiration. I wouldn't recommend copying directly, but take inspiration. So if there are certain attributes you like about somebody's editing or somebody's color palette, then incorporate that into your work and also add your bit of sauce as well, like your style.
Yeah,
that makes sense.
Good advice. Yeah. And you've got a couple of questions coming in for you. Jackie asks, do you ever not use the tone curve?
No. No. I mean, no. I'm sorry. I always use it. Yeah.
Yeah, that's your way. No, fair way, and it's a good way too. That's the first time I've seen it today, actually, the tone curve. It's not something I've used before, so it's good to see. Sean asks, what are the input and output values on the tone curve?
So I don't know. I'm not actually too sure, but the input and output values is basically, it shows the point. It's sort of like coordinates for the point that you're moving on the tone curve. So, I mean, this point here is 0, 0. It goes all up to 155, I think it is. Oh no, 255. So I think it's just a numerical system that shows you where your points are on that gradient map. So, I mean, the best way to describe it or use it is if I wanted to make sure that each individual channel was exactly the same. So there weren't any discrepancies within the colors. I would make sure that when I'm moving this point, I'm looking at input 36 and output 35. And then I'm going to the green channel and making sure that this point is again input 36, output 35. So it's just a very accurate way of showing where your adjustments are on that tone curve.
And Gareth asks, does it depend on the bit depth of the image?
I'm not too sure actually. I don't think it is. I think you can apply it to anything. I mean, I've used the tone curve on iPhone images, drone shots. It all depends on, I guess, I mean, I like to shoot all of my images in RAW if possible, because then it gives you a greater scope to play around with. So that's one thing, always shoot RAW for sure.
Yeah.
But you can use the tone curve on anything. And I mean, Lightroom's on mobile phone, it's on iPad, and I've used Lightroom CC to edit my iPhone images using tone curves on there. So yeah, it's not really dependent on too much.
Sure. And I know that we're in Lightroom today. You do use Photoshop as well, as you mentioned to me earlier before we went live that that's where you do a little bit of the editing. Do you find then that you go to Photoshop first, remove any unwanted objects, and then finish everything up in Lightroom, or is it the other way around?
No, I use Lightroom first, and then I go into Photoshop. I mean, I can give a little preview if you want. I mean, we'll go for this one. So very basically, I've done the tone adjustments. I'll then right click and edit in Photoshop 2020. That way it brings the full TIFF file over to Photoshop. So you're not having to export the image as a JPEG and then drag and drop that into Photoshop and potentially lose quality. It's a very seamless process. So just right click and then go down to edit in and then Photoshop, and it will come up. I guess from this point, what I like to do is I like to create a duplicate layer. That's something that you should always do. It stops you making permanent changes to your base file. And I'll normally just go to image and then maybe add auto contrast just to give it a little bit more pop, and just to enhance the image a little bit more. And then this is where the cleanup process happens. So people often ask, how do you get your images so clean? And a lot of that is actually due to removing distracting elements of your photos. So for me, these lines here are a little bit distracting, and there's a very, very simple way of getting rid of them. You can use the lasso tool, which is up here. If you click and hold, you can change between a lasso tool that you can just draw freehand in a circle, or however you like, or you can choose the polygonal one, which you can actually draw shapes. So depending on what you want to use it for, that's what I'd say. I'll draw around, I guess, this pavement thing here, and it's a very, very simple way to get rid of it. All you need to do is right click and go to fill, and then make sure that in the content section, you've selected content aware fill, and then just click, make sure the opacity is 100%, and then click OK. And Photoshop is a wizard, like it just does it.
Yeah, this is a good feature, content aware fill. I remember when this came out of Max, right? So good.
Like that, and it's gone. Like it's fantastic. So just do that for multiple different parts of the image. I've had this printed and I've actually removed the sign here, Mango, just because of branding. So if you do have images that you don't want any distinctive brands in, that's a great way to get rid of them as well. So yeah, that's my process. Start with Lightroom, get your preset, make your preset, add your style, and then import that into Photoshop, and then do all the intricate cleanup. And yeah, there you have it. I think that's the
Nice. There was a few comments there. John mentioned, John Hay mentioned a really good description. He says, for me, Lightroom is mostly global adjustments, and then Photoshop is targeted ones.
Yeah, yeah, that's very true. Very, very true. I mean, you can actually do, I mean, pretty much all the stuff you can do in Lightroom, you can do in Photoshop as well. But I find the interface and usability of Lightroom is just second to none. It's just a lot easier and a lot more simply laid out. So obviously you can make adjustment layers in Photoshop, and you can play around with the tone curve here. The theory behind the tone curve in Photoshop is exactly the same. So you've got your different sections, and when you make adjustments, it works the same as Lightroom, but I find Lightroom is laid out a lot easier and a lot more streamlined.
We do have a question from Sandrine, actually, who says, do you ever use the direct handle when you click on an area of the image to locate the particular point on the curve? That's what Sandrine does, to be sure.
Yeah. So that's the word, actually, direct handle. Thank you. Because, yeah, I didn't know what it was called earlier. It's this one next to the adjust panel. And that's the one, if you click it, you can see where, what part of the image is being affected on the tone curve. You can actually click and drag, I believe. Yeah. So if I wanted to reduce the exposure of the sky, I've just used this tool here to go over that brightest point, and I'm now clicked and dragged downwards. And as you can see, it's making the adjustment on the tone curve here. So again, just for just as an example, I'm going to do it on the blacks here. As you can see, it's located that it's at the lower part of the tone curve, so it's moving around about this point here. I'm going to give that a click and drag down, and as you can see, it's adjusting that actual specific value. So that's another way to edit your tone curve. It's a very powerful way as well.
Nice. And I think, it's one of the things that I've learned from Adobe Live is that it's so good to see people's different preferences for things, because there's so many different ways to do something. And it's always good to find a new way, because I know that in the chat, Jackie mentions, I prefer the pen tool to edit. Hold on, we've also got...
Photoshop.
Yes, Stuart says, I would have gone for the healing brush for speed on that one when you use the content aware fill. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so it's different preferences, right?
There are so many different ways, which is amazing, because then you can make your own workflow, and there's a lot of freedom. And that's why I love photography. You can control anything, like from the inception of the ideas to the actual taking the photos, to the editing, to the publishing. It's all yours. So feel free and just have fun with it. There's no rules. You do what you want.
Yeah, definitely. And tell me, I always want to know this from any amazing photographers. What photos do you have hanging on your walls at home?
I actually have my friends' photos, really strangely.
Okay.
I mean, yeah, friends that I've grown up taking photos with. So I've got a good friend of mine called Toby Shinobi, who's also an Adobe ambassador, I believe. He's based in Chicago now, but yeah, we grew up learning and teaching each other photography. So I've got some of his work. There's a lovely lady called Lucy Hamzadia. She's also an incredible street photographer based in London. So I've got some of her work. I tend to have more photography books than artwork, actually. I love reading photo books, for sure. There's some really good ones.
Yeah, no, definitely. Siobhan says in the chat, it's just jumped up, I love seeing how people work, because it reminds me that there isn't a wrong way. So true. Exactly. So true. It's so good to see. And you're right, photo books though, it's lovely to sit down. I'm like that a bit with recipe books, by the way. I do love a good, just sit down with a cuppa and have a look through. Yeah. Always good. And Gareth does say, I have a feeling that Ron isn't actually in an office. I think that's Zoom background you've got.
Yeah, damn. I thought no one would notice. I mean, there's a little halo, but...
Nice. Yeah, John says everyone should print out some of their own work. That's so true.
That's very true. Very true. I actually have a couple of my own work. And it's good. It's good to see your images, well, one in the physical form. It has a different appeal and a different relationship with you. And then secondly, when you blow it up larger, you can then see intricate details or mistakes that you've made in your editing process, or things that on the screen you might have missed. So maybe there was a piece of litter on the floor that you hadn't noticed on the screen, but when you've blown it up, you've noticed it now, and it's a lot more prominent. So yeah, it's a good way of evaluating your work, printing, for sure.
Yeah, and you have a big love for London. As you mentioned earlier on, you've got a lot of cityscapes, and obviously you've seen Chicago as well. But you know, have you been out taking any photos recently? Have you been keeping that creativity alive, getting out there and taking images?
Yeah, so I mean, during lockdown, it was very difficult because everyone was locked down. So I wasn't able to go out and take photos, but I really dedicated this time to enhancing my editing, specifically working on my commercial side of my business. So putting together a digital CV and getting my statistics all in order and working on that side of the business. I've recently started shooting again, which has been amazing. And that's been a mixture of personal work, so cityscape photography, and I've done a few commercial projects as well. I just finished a project with Vogue, which was amazing, for the September issue.
Wow.
Yeah, with one of my good friends, Miss Anne Harriman. So yeah, that was insane. Like, it's been incredible. So yeah, slowly and surely getting back to shooting, which is good. And hopefully you can keep going. Yeah.
Oh, definitely. You have to tell us more about the Vogue one tomorrow, because somebody brought it up in the chat earlier. I saw it, but it flew up there before I could get to it. Oh, man. And Gareth asked the question, would you ever use a specialist printers for photography prints rather than a desktop printer?
Oh, yeah, for sure. Yeah, definitely. They know what they're doing. The quality of the inks they're using, the papers, the different, definitely use a specialist printer if you can. I use one I think it's in Whitechapel, called Print Space. That's a very good one in London. If you're from here, check that one out. They're really, really good. But yeah, definitely. And I mean, it's investing in the photography community as well, you know, so definitely do it.
Yeah, definitely. And there is a question from Stuart, who asks, do you ever use the high pass filter technique? So duplicate layer, apply filter, and layer adjust, or is that now kind of out of use these days?
I used to use high pass filter. For those who don't know, it's something you can do in Photoshop. It's just a different way of sharpening your image. I think it sharpens just the detail. It doesn't it's not like a global sharpen tool. I mean, I haven't done it in ages, but I think, let me give it a go. I think you duplicate a layer, you head into filter, and then I think it's an other, yep, and then you have high pass, and it looks really weird. Like, it will look very strange in a second. Yeah, you won't be able to see much, but if you zoom in, you can see that the sharpest, or like the highest points of contrast are what gets sharpened. So it's not everything, it's just the highest points of contrast. I normally keep it around 1.5. I'll click OK. And then what you want to do is you want to change the blend mode to overlay. And then that way it just sharpens your image, just the points that are most important. I know my friend Toby Shinobi uses that religiously. But I just tend to use the normal sharpening tools in Lightroom. I find it a good job.
Back to preference again, right? It's good to see other ways. And share Ronald, what's in store for tomorrow? What more can we expect from the part 2?
Cool. So part 2, we're going to go into the HSL tab. Again, super powerful. And we're going to talk a little bit about color science and how colors work together. I mean, really briefly, as we've seen in the tone curve here, we've got blue and then yellow/orange, which are opposites, and opposites complement each other. And that's why, like in this photo, we've got the kind of blue hour sky, but then we've got the orange of the lights, and that's why they work so well. So we're going to talk a little bit about that and how to manipulate your photo to induce more of that, basically. And that will be with the hue, the saturation, the luminance tabs. And then we'll go into split toning as well, which will show just adding a bit more style to your image. So, yeah.
Fab. Well, the chat will continue today in Discord for everybody that wants to continue all of these, photography tips, great tips that we've heard from Ron today. And it is, of course, World Photography Day. So yeah, keep the chat going in Discord. We'll be back again, same time tomorrow for part 2 of our masterclass with Ron. As you can hear, there's lots to cover tomorrow. So I'm really looking forward to that. And bring the chat. We'll be chatting on Behance tomorrow. So as I said, we'll see you tomorrow at midday. Thanks, Ron. See you all tomorrow.
See you tomorrow.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Mm-hmm.